Joining me now is Russia's ambassador to Canada, Oleg Stepanov. Ambassador, it's good to have you back on the program. You were on this program in January 23rd, and you told me when I asked that Russia had no intention of ever invading Ukraine. Let me remind you what you said.
I once again can assure you there are no intentions, no desire, and no will for Russia to engage in any military conflict or military operations vis-a-vis Ukraine.
Ambassador, that was a blatant lie. You knew it. A month later, on February 24th, your country invaded. Why should anyone believe what Russia says or what you say about Russia's war in Ukraine now?
Well, Evan, I appreciate you being direct and calling my words a lie, but I would disagree with you because during my public appearances in January and in February, prior to the start of the special military operation,
You mean the war? I just want to make sure we're clear. It's not a special military operation. It's a war. People are dying. Well, you know that. Let's just call it what it is. It's a war.
Well, I'm an official and I operate with my government official position, okay? But if you recall, several times during my public appearances, I mentioned that, yes, there is no desire, no will, no intent to militarily involve in the crisis in Ukraine. However, there was one caveat that my government and myself stated clearly, unless there is a provocation on behalf of the regime in Kyiv. And right now, we have 100% concrete proof that with the help of your government in particular, the authorities in Kyiv planned an offensive military operation against Donbas republics.
But Ambassador, sorry.
Similar to what was done in 1995 in Serbska Krajina.
But so,
in Yugoslavia.
Ambassador, let's be clear. We can't. Your country invaded Ukraine. It was the pretext to an invasion was putting 200,000 troops on the border and then invading. You'd already snatched Crimea before in 2014. Sir, let's be clear, and I want reality to interfere with the propaganda. Russia invaded. Russia was supporting the separatist movement in Donbass before, and now Russia has bombed Kyiv, Lviv, Dnipro, Mariupol. Your country has invaded and is conducting an illegal war. There is no pretext to invade another country. In fact, it violates Russia's own agreement, the 1997 founding agreement with NATO. So what is the justification to invade Ukraine and destroy civilian lives?
Evan, you perfectly understand that the operation that was undertaken by Russia is to protect people of Donbas and of Donetsk and Lugansk republics.
You're protecting them by bombing Mariupol. I'm just asking. Was the massacre in Bucha? Is the massacre in Bucha protecting the people in Donbass? How does that work?
Well, Evan, your government and the governments of the West failed to notice that for 8 years, the consecutive governments in Kyiv were waging war against civilian population of Donbass, against their own citizens who are ethnic Russians. And if you remember, we were very clear and very direct in our communication with the Western governments and with the assistant parties, with Berlin and with Paris, saying, guys, there is a way out of the situation. It's implementation of the Minsk agreements. Implementation of Minsk agreements, but
but Russia again. I know that's the Russian view, sir. The Minsk agreements of 2014 and 2015
is an international agreement that was
violated by Russia
by the UN Security Council, and it was never implemented by Kyiv. So it's your responsibility, your government responsibility for this conflict. Okay. It's not us.
Okay, Russia invades a country and it's our responsibility. Sir, just on the Minsk agreements, the failed agreements of 2014, 2015, again, it was Russia that, and Vladimir Putin, who declared that the Minsk agreements of 2015 is no longer evident. And then, of course, that began the instability in the East. But I want to get to something more. I don't want to go over history.
Because for 7 years, the Kievan side was doing nothing, not implementing the agreements for 7 years since the signature in 2015.
Let's talk about now the invasion. There is growing evidence, and I don't think it's funny, there's growing evidence of war crimes committed by Russia in Ukraine. According to the recent report from Human Rights Watch, which, by the way, I have in my hand, there's extensive evidence of executions, unlawful killings, torture in the town of Bucha. Hundreds of bodies, over 600 as of April 15th, have been uncovered, lying dead in the streets, hand tied behind their backs. They're executed. There are satellite pictures that you have seen where these bodies are there before the Russians left. How does your government justify what look like war crimes in places like Bucha?
Evan, I would totally disagree with you, and I would not accept the Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International evidence because, you know, the reputation is dubious in this regard. But I had an extensive conversation with senior officials in the global affairs discussing that particular Bucha situation, and I was showing them at those photos that all bodies, or at least those that were showing in the international media and social networks, were the white armbands. White armbands is the sign of the either Russian personnel or those people on the territories that were controlled by the Russian forces, who identify themselves as friendly to Russian troops. Those people were lying there dead. So it obviously shows that they were killed by the punitive troops.
But it's a lie. Again, sir, it is a lie. Maxar satellite images of Bucha taken on March 18th, March 19th, March 31st, provided to places like Reuters and others, clearly show bodies in the street nearly 2 weeks before Russian troops left. Just a second. This is important. I'm going to show. Just a second. This is important. These bodies were in the streets when Russia controlled Bucha. So, sir, the Russians are asking people to, did these people execute themselves? Did they tie their own hands behind their backs and shoot themselves? Did they kill their own children? There is evidence from the United Nations, from Human Rights Watch, from Maxar satellite images that this happened under Russia control, sir.
Evan, I heard your position. If you give me an opportunity to reply, first of all, I would recommend you to watch the video published by the 1st Battalion of Ukrainian forces who entered Bucha after Russian troops left. It was headed by infamous guy called Botsman. It's a paramilitary group that was entering Bucha, and it clearly heard on tape. One of the guys asked him, "You see those civilians? They are not wearing blue armbands. Can we kill them?" And he says, "Yes, shoot everybody."
Sir, you're asking me to believe Russia. No, but sir, this is important. How do you think this?
On Twitter, in Facebook, everybody, and
no, this has been widely debunked.
Recognize that Kiev regime is waging war against their own citizens, using them as human shields, shelling indiscriminately the civilian infrastructure, and then
Ambassador, I'm not going to let you. Respectfully, I am not. You cannot yell over me and invert reality. You're asking us to believe that Russia invaded, Russia launched missiles, Russia indiscriminately bombed. There's evidence, there's pictures. Our own CTV journalists have been to Bucha. They have seen, and now you're saying the Ukrainians bombed their own cities, executed their own, have destroyed Mariupol, have destroyed. Your country has invaded. How do you think this destruction and death is happening? How do you think it's happening?
We are serious people. You heard what happened in Kramatorsk when .U cluster munition missile was launched by Kievan authorities against people who wanted to leave the city .U is the rocket, is a missile that is employed only by the government of Ukraine. We have no .U in our arsenal.
Sorry, let me respectfully disagree. The United Nations Human Rights Report, you want to talk about, I'll read it. Russian armed forces have indiscriminately shelled and bombed populated areas, killing civilians, wrecking hospitals. Quote, when we saw in government-controlled Kramatorsk on April 8th, when cluster submunitions hit the railway station, killing 60 civilians, injuring 111 others, emblematic of the failure to adhere to the principle of distinction, the prohibition against indiscriminate attacks, and the principle of precaution. This is the Human Rights Watch. I'm reading it. They allege it's Russia using those cluster bombs, Russia violating the law.
Evan, please. Every military expert here in Canada would tell you that Russia doesn't have .U. It's outdated missiles that only Ukraine employs. We have trajectory. We have a site of launch that was launched from the Western Ukraine, from the territory controlled by the Ukrainian government. And that's the signature of how they do those things. They, in order to whitewash themselves, they
whitewash what? But I'm just trying to understand. Is the Russian contention that Ukraine is attacking itself? That Ukraine? Yes. That's the contention. That Russia invaded to stop Ukraine from attacking. Like, it doesn't make sense.
Citizens. Ukrainian troops are shelling their own citizens in order to present it as if it was done by the Russians.
Here's Human Rights Watch. On March 20th, Russian forces shot and killed Artem, 37, in his garage, where he's apparently gone to get jars of food. There's pictures of his blood. Like, you're saying all this is a fake. All this is a fake.
It cannot be independently verified. Human Rights Watch is an NGO, as an Amnesty International. It has no legitimacy. Their reports are doctored. As those satellite images, I believe, it's my personal belief.
That everything's doctored. What about the mass graves? Let's talk about mass graves. Maxar satellite images reveal mass graves in the southern city of Mariupol, 12 miles west of the city. Larger than 3 football fields, holding up to 9,000 bodies.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised because the Ukrainians, those neo-Nazis, Azov and Right Sector battalions, they were shelling civilian quarters when they were able to gather the bodies and put them in the graves. They now tell you that it was made by Russia. But it was
of course, but sir, is Russia shelling Mariupol? Yes. Russia's just claimed control of Mariupol. Now you're saying that Russia is not killing people. What about the use of rape as again, I'm going to read from the UN. There are reports that Ukrainian, and we've heard it, that teenage girls have been kept in a basement in Bucha and gang raped. There are multiple allegations of sexual violence against women, men, and girls by Russian armed forces. Human Rights Watch has received 75 allegations across the country, the majority in the Kyiv region, and they're looking into this. Is Russia using rape as a weapon of war?
Absolutely not. And Evan, I would focus your attention that all those allegations are coming from the propagandist of Kyiv regime. It was never confirmed or verified. And let's just kind of look at the theater of war, okay? Can you imagine that there is a fight, goes on, shells flying, people shooting at each other, there is a military action, and somehow part of the troops are going somewhere to kind of saying, okay, let's do something nasty and criminal, right? It's just, you know, it's BS.
We're seeing it. Why is it? It's not, sir, it's really not hard to imagine. We're seeing Russia invade a country and destroy cities, shell buildings, apartment buildings, hospitals, schools. There are 5 million refugees.
Evan, since the start of the conflict in eastern Ukraine, since 2014, Russia hosted 2.5 million refugees from eastern Ukraine. And the international community, your human rights organization, pretend not to notice that. But let's talk about the tactics that was employed by the Azov battalions that were actually, by the way, prepared by your unifier operation.
Respectfully, yes, I understand that you have found some fascists in Ukraine. This is not a pretext, but
No.
these are pathetic pretexts to attack a sovereign nation. You know that.
Evan, we are discussing. You asked me a technical question. I'm trying to respond. When Ukrainian troops take positions in the civilian quarters, what they did, and it's verified. You can check it online. What they did, they took the part of the inhabitants of those buildings, put them underground in the cellars. On the first and second floor, they took the firing position. On the third floor, they put additional civilians. Right. On the fourth and fifth floor, they put snipers and grenade launchers. They were using civilians as human shields.
Okay,
this is one of the reasons why this operation goes very slowly, because our Ministry of Defense, our people on the ground, they're very cautious.
First of all, it's a war, and there's been indiscriminate bombing. The idea that you're respect. But can I ask? Okay.
And about bombing and missile strikes, Russian army only destroys the military facilities.
Sir, you know that's a lie. Sir, we have pictures of apartment buildings. Our own reporters have seen it. Let me ask you this. Two more questions. Will Russia use tactical nuclear weapons? Will Russia consider invading Moldova?
Of course not. What for?
I want to ask you, you and I have spoken before, and I'm asking you a serious question as a human being. You are defending a leader who has lied, has allegedly, and with overwhelming evidence, committed war crimes. I'm wondering what your moral line is. How do you become an apologist for these kind of alleged war crimes and death? Is there a moral core that kicks in with you that you finally say, I cannot justify the slaughter anymore? When does that kick in?
Well, Evan, to start with, I will disagree with you when you operate with such allegations as war crimes. It's a presumption of guilt that in the West often used against...
It's the United Nations. It is the United Nations.
No, it's not the United Nations.
I'm literally reading the United Nations report from Michelle Bachelet from the United Nations Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner. There's evidence of war crimes.
It's one of the UN bodies, and I have a reason to believe, with all due respect to Madam Bachelet, that he is biased in this case. But as an ambassador, as a Russian citizen, I'm a patriot of my country, and I stand with my president, and I stand with the troops on the ground. And me and my colleagues here at the embassy, we are 100% confident that we stand on the right side of history at this time.
Okay, you have no moral qualms about what's happening. Will Ukraine, does Russia believe Ukraine should exist as a sovereign country?
It's up to the people of Ukraine to decide the fate of Ukraine. What we've been watching for decades is that the people of Ukraine became hostages of the nationalistic and actually anti-national series of governments. And the future of Ukraine will be decided by those people who wanted.
So if it's going to be decided by Ukrainians, why does Russia invade? Why are you trying to define it? I mean, that's the whole point. Let Ukrainians decide their own future. Why is Russia invading a sovereign country to do it for them? That's why no one believes what you're saying, sir, because it does not make sense.
Well, Evan, let's just kind of have a retrospective look at what's happened in 2014. You remember there was a President Yanukovych who was democratically elected, congratulated by the Canadian government, by the United States, by the European Union. There was a popular uprising, whatever you call it. We call it coup d'etat, you can call it the revolution. But the result was that he was ousted from the office. Democratically elected president was ousted from the office.
2014 when Russia snatched Crimea.
After that, Crimea voted to join Russia. The coup happened before. But Do you remember that during that instability in Kiev when the fate of the government was discussed with the opposition, with Yanukovych, Madam Nuland, Deputy Secretary of State of the United States, went there directly supporting the uprising against the democratically elected president.
You know what?
That's,
it's
the publicity of the West when it's in your interest, you want to subvert, you want to...
No one subverts, sir, it is the Russians that have invaded a country. The idea that this is the Western responsibility is different. But Ambassador, you've given me a lot of your time today. I will leave you with one question. When will Russia leave Ukraine?
It all depends what we call Ukraine. We recognized, as you remember, we recognized the independence of Donetsk and Lugansk republics and conducting the operations in order to protect them. We'll see what the rest of the Ukraine, when the truth is uncovered about the nature of this regime, decides about their own future. In the international law, there are two principles. One principle of sovereignty and the other one of self-determination. And we'll let the people of Ukraine to decide what they want.
Ambassador Stepanov, I appreciate you joining us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Evan.